When the city of Santa Fe announced in March that their attorney Gino Zamora believed state law did not specifically prohibit same-sex marriage and thus allowed it, lawmakers asked New Mexico Attorney General Gary King for an opinion. Last week he stopped short of issuing a formal opinion, but did tell reporters he doesn't believe state law allows same-sex marriage. Joining us on the line this week to discuss this and more, former State Senator Dede Feldman is back for a second week in a row. Glad to have her. From the Garrity Group Public Relations, Tom Garrity takes a seat for us. Always good to have him. Former State House Republican Whip Daniel Foley returns. And the CEO of the New Mexico Green Chamber of Commerce, Laura Sanchez, is back. Now, Dede, let's begin with you. A formal letter of opinion was written by the AG. Doesn't have the force of law, certainly, but he had an interesting quote in there saying he supports the idea of same-sex marriage, but it's only going to be solved one of two ways, through the courts or constitutionally. And it leaves a bit of a window here for, let's talk about the legal side of it. Is that the way this is going to have to go? Did he do the right thing by backing all the way off and letting the courts handle this?
I think he did. I think he did. First of all, I think you have to back up and say, what is an AG's opinion? An AG's opinion is just that. Right. It's an opinion. And this was an informal AG's opinion. It wasn't even a formal AG's opinion.
I didn't know there was a difference.
Yes, there is a difference, and he spelled that out when he gave the opinion. And he threw it back into the courts. And actually, though, if you read beyond the headline, you saw that he said there is a very good equal protection case for a same-sex marriage based on New Mexico statutes.
Exactly. Laura, let me swing to you on this one because it would be reasonable to assume some folks were anticipating Gary King coming out with something a little bit stronger here, those who were in support of same-sex marriage. He got asked by a certain legislator to come up with an opinion. He has. What does this do to the idea of same-sex marriage here? Does it move the ball in any direction, forward, backwards? We're just in the same place we were before.
Well, I think it's a disappointment. I mean, certainly there were a lot of people that were hopeful that the opinion would come back more in favor of same-sex marriage. But I don't know that it necessarily changes a whole lot what needs to happen or what will eventually happen, which is a court, something before the courts to get a more definitive opinion. Because I think the senator's correct. You know, this is an attorney general opinion, but so was the opinion in 2004 by Patricia Madrid, which a lot of clerks, including our clerk here in Bernalillo County, point to as definitive guidance on whether they can or cannot issue licenses. So I think that's an important thing to remember, is that both attorney generals have made, have issued opinions, informal or not, and that informs what the clerks then feel comfortable doing under the law. So I think something more definitive coming out of the courts would be certainly much more authoritative for everybody.
Sure.
And I think that's still a strategy.
Right. Tom, county clerks, they're in the same place. But good to see you again, by the way. Love the rock and the bow tie. It's working for me. I love that.
You bet. Thank you.
Glad you like that. Where does it leave the county clerks? They're in the same spot. He says to them, hold your powder. Just don't do anything right now. But does this not beg a renegade county clerk to get out there and do something just to push this forward a little bit?
Oh, sure. There's always that possibility. You know, you have a county clerk who's just wanting to, kind of give their own interpretation of the law, and all of a sudden, bam, you have a big issue. When it comes to the county clerks, obviously it's good that they take the direction, at least on this particular issue, from the Attorney General. I think Gary King did a smart thing as well. I agree with Senator Feldman that, this was a smart move for him on a number of different levels, but also on the campaign level, because, since he has announced he's running for governor, he's kind of, with one hand, he has to still be Attorney General, the other hand still, needs to campaign. Sure. And I think he showed that, he can do his job without getting too political. I know that's an oxymoron in a way, but so I thought that was a good move for him.
Yeah, interestingly, Dan, let me tell you this: Gary King he's on the record as a lawmaker. In
97.
Fact, 97, exactly right. He was chair of the House Consumer and Public Affairs Committee, part of a unanimous vote to advance a bill that would have prohibited same-sex marriage. So let's talk about Tom brought up the politics of this. I'm glad he did that right at that moment. Does that pose a problem for Gary King, that vote in 97? Does he have a lean here that we should all be aware of, or does it just not matter at the end of the day?
I think he's going to talk about evolving, but it's interesting to hear Tom say that he's not being political. I think he's being extremely political. He's voted for Defense of Marriage Act. He tried to define marriage in 97. Now he's getting ready to run for governor, and he's issuing an opinion that he feels says the law doesn't allow this. but then he's encouraging people to go to the courts. So, and that's kind of one of the things I think. I don't think this needs to be resolved in the courts. It needs to be resolved by the legislature. And I think that's one of our problems. It doesn't matter what the law says, go to court and get a decision based on it. But I think Gary King has huge problems. I mean, I think this has been, Gary King his travel time out of the state as Attorney General has been second to none. His decision and his flippant decisions, whether it's the IED stuff, whether it's giving some opinions, not giving other opinions, giving what did you call it? Not an unofficial, an informal.
Right.
I mean, an opinion's an opinion. What's that?
You said IUD?
Yeah, remember
You mean IUD?
IUD, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't.
That's okay. You're an
He wasn't
ex-Marine.
he wasn't dealing with improvised explosive devices.
That's what I was
Sorry.
doing.
But I think on this deal,
Yeah.
I think that he is, I think that Gary is just demonstrating, I think, highlighting his propensity to play politics. The wording in his opinion, the way he's trying to sit on both sides of the fence in this opinion, I think it just highlights that, he has been one of the most partisan attorney generals, and I think people are seeing that, and I think it's going to cost him. I don't think he can separate his AG job from his candidacy.
No. If he wanted to be partisan, he would have come out and said, the law is ambiguous, and I think that it is legal. But he's a lawyer first. And his decision was a legal one, or not a decision, his opinion was a legal one. And that's all. He knows that he can't go further than what the law says.
Well, and that reinforces it. It's what the law says. And to Dan's point, the legislature is really the last hope for anyone to have any additional changes to existing state law.
Let's talk about that. The legislature, and Senator, I'll stay with you on this one. Is there any indication the constitutional fight, so to speak, in the legislature has a prayer at this point for same-sex marriage? And why even bother if he's already feeling like the courts are going to be the way to solve it, and others are feeling like the ACLU are feeling like?
Well, we have a
courts.
governor that would not sign it. So of course the arena shifts when you have a governor that is opposed to it. We had a chance, a very close chance, to approve civil unions back in 2007, and we narrowly missed doing that. So I think that kind of says it's going to be very difficult in the legislature. But again, he is saying to all of the proponents of same-sex marriage, the courts are your best shot based on the law. And he cited what has happened in other states which have the same kind of language as we do. So it's a very legal
Would
thing.
you agree with that, Laura? That sense of, is he signaling something here that this is the direction? If you want this to happen, this is the direction. Don't count me in for the reasons Tom mentions and other reasons. This is the way to go.
Well, I think it goes back to his primary role as a lawyer.
Right.
He is in a position of having to do the legal analysis. Whether he's specifically providing a roadmap or not, I think the roadmap is there, or that's an opportunity. And to one thing that Dan said about the legislature being the only place, we can look back through history at all kinds of social issues that have been advanced because of decisions through the court. We would have a very different education system, very different civil rights movement if it weren't for some of the decisions that the courts made. So even though, yes, the legislature creates laws, I think it's the court's responsibility to interpret that, and I think it's the court's responsibility also to interpret legal issues, constitutional issues, when it comes to fundamental rights.
Have you seen some recent polling on same-sex marriage and where we are statewide? What's your sense of where we sit right now as a populace?
Yeah, I have not seen it.
We talked about it last week.
Did we?
Yeah,
That's
remember?
right. It's
Yeah,
a
it
little
was in
under
the poll.
50%.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well, as far as our perception survey, it's not something that we necessarily poll.
Okay, okay.
But when you look at general perception and support of the governor, you could make a case that people who support the governor, if she has a lot of support, they also support the issues she supports.
Sure.
Whether that holds water, I guess, is a whole other issue.
I don't know. That's the way it works.
And I think Laura did a really good job of splitting hairs. I think, and I think that is, it's the legislative jobs to pass the law. It's the judicial's job to interpret the law, not rewrite the law. And I think the law, through my time in the legislature, has been pretty clear that New Mexico the law does not support same-sex marriage. Whether you're for it or against it, the law doesn't support it. Now, Is there a bigger civil rights question at stake here? I don't believe so, but I believe that if you're going to fix it, you got to go through the legislative process, not to court, not find a friendly, sympathetic judge that's going to go ahead and say, regardless of what the law says, I'm going to interpret something here. It's the legislator's job to do this. They've had it. The Democrats have been in control of the legislature for 70 plus years.
But surely you don't mean that once the legislature weighs in that's it. That proponents, say, well,
yes,
you know,
that's the way the system is supposed to work, Gene. You don't elect people to go to a representative democracy, pass laws, and then when you don't like them, you go to lifetime appointed judges and say, well, we don't like what they did. Why don't you, as a lifetime appointed guy, just circumvent that?
It goes to Frederick Douglass I have in my ear here because, this idea of using the court, Senator, goes way, way, way back, as Laura mentioned, through many, many, many things. You couldn't, if you cannot get satisfaction through our process, we have another process. What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, Dan's argument assumes that everything that the legislature does is absolutely constitutional and absolutely without blemish.
And fully informed.
And
which is a
fully
big
informed.
flaw.
Oh, no, I'm not assuming any of that
but
at all.
the Constitution is something that the courts should have the last word on, rather than legislators,
Sure.
because they are trained in that. Legislators are not all lawyers.
So what makes the Constitution different today, since we haven't had any changes to our state constitution when it deals with this, today than it was 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20? This fight's
Reasonable
been
question.
going on for years.
Sure, absolutely.
And so the problem is not that the Constitution is changing, it's that people are figuring out ways to subvert the Constitution when the reality of the way to change it is through the process,
Well, the
which is
thing
go to the
Finish with
legislature.
Laura.
It's
Go
not
ahead.
that it changes, it's that its application evolves as our culture evolves.
No.
Just in the same way that constitutional questions, during the Civil Rights Movement, and the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, and all kinds of other things that came out of the Civil Rights Movement, just as they were basically changed because of court decisions that interpreted the Constitution, that's the same kind of thing that can happen now because
Those
our
were
culture
amendments
has
to the
evolved.
Constitution,
No,
not
Brown
legal
versus
decisions.
Board of Education. Let's
There
take
were
that.
Equal Protection Clause arguments that had been made, not because they changed the Constitution, but because there was an application of the Constitution to what was happening in terms of separate but equal, many other examples.
So if the Attorney General really wanted to make a case, why doesn't he go after equal protection? Why doesn't he make a decision first and foremost on this particular issue? He hasn't done it. I think he
Because
sees
he
it as a
doesn't
political
make law.
liability.
He doesn't make
But
law.
he has a chance to challenge it.
The last Attorney
And
General
he may
did.
very well weigh in. I mean, there's no one to say that he or somebody in his office wouldn't, file an amicus in a situation like that if it were to come.
I got a
before
funny
the
feeling.
court.
I'm going to wrap it up with Laura right there. I think you're right. I don't think that office is through with this argument necessarily, but I also think the courts, as you say, ACLU and others, have a clear path. They know what has to happen here. It's just a question of getting it in that process.
And there's suits
So-
before
Find a
the
friendly
court
judge.
right
That's the
now.
plan. Find a
Exactly
friendly
right.
judge.
In a moment, the future of a very, very, very hot, very dry Southwest.